It's the appointed time and we have already formed a quorum. This is the first meeting of the Committee on Members' Interests. The agenda has been circulated to members and let's get started right away. First item, issuance of advisory guidelines on matters of ethics in relation to the conduct of members of the Legislative Council. As members are aware, under Rule 73B1 or under 71D of the Rules of Procedure, one of the functions of the Committee on Members' Interests is to consider matters of ethics in relation to the conduct of members in their capacity as such, and to give advice and issue guidelines on such matters. The first set of advisory guidelines was issued by CMI to all members in 1996. And since then, at the beginning of every term of this Council, the advisory guidelines with amendments where necessary would be issued to all members of the Council. So I'm sure you've all got a copy of that with you. Shall we invite the Secretary to brief us on the guidelines that have been annexed to the paper? Thank you, Chairman. Paper number is CMI/4/12-13. With regard to the advisory guidelines issued by the last term of this Council, that's in the appendix, and there are altogether 7 points. And this paper is advisory in nature, and as set out in the paper, the source of this has been set out, and as we have explained, the scope of the CMI does not include investigating into complaints against members' misconduct unless it has to do with the declaration of interest and also other matters in relation to pecuniary interest. But then with regard to the ethics of how members conduct themselves, it has nothing to do with this committee. But then on 2 occasions, there was power given by the Council meeting to this committee to investigate into the conduct of members, but then both motions were rejected. And there is also a proposal to consider whether or not we should appoint an independent member who is not a council member to look into complaints against members' misconduct. And during the last term, we also consulted a retired parliamentarian from the UK, and according to his advice, without a code of conduct, then the commissioner so appointed would have difficulty investigating into such complaints, and therefore with regard to the scope of this committee's work, we can consider issuing the advisory guidelines as attached to the paper to members. As regards sanctions for members' misconduct, then members might wish to consider how those can be taken up in the future. Yes, thank you. I think we are all aware of that. That is, during the last term of this Council, the CMI did a lot of work. And in accordance with our past practice, at the beginning of this term, we will attach to our paper a set of advisory guidelines to remind them of how they should conduct themselves in exercising their powers or in their capacity as council members, how we should declare our interests and deal with the business of this Council, and how we have to conduct ourselves in our capacity of members. So this is an advisory guideline, and this serves as a reminder, and we do it every time at the beginning of the term. So with members' agreement, we will take another look, and we will take a look at the advisory guidelines, and then we will issue them to council members. Do we have to do it every time at the start of a new term? Well, as soon as you become members, I think the set of guidelines will be given to all members of the council. But then let's take a look at the appendix to see if there is any fresh views on the advisory guidelines, or is there anything that members might wish to raise for discussion. There are altogether 7 points in the advisory guidelines. Do we have to go through them one by one? Any comments? In fact, the information is very simple. That is, a member should ensure that his conduct must not be such as to bring discredit upon the Legislative Council. A member should conduct himself in such a way as not to place himself in a position which may be contrary to the generally assumed standard of conduct expected of a member of the Council when deciding whether to engage in activities of a commercial nature, such as advertisement activities and so on. Members should accord due consideration as to whether the nature and contents of such activities might be regarded as not in keeping with the position or prestige of a member of the Council and thereby bring discredit upon the Council. 3. A member should adhere to the spirit and the letter of any rules or regulations made by the Council, its committees or subcommittees, or the President for the regulation of the practice and procedure of the Council, and their behavior in the conduct of, and also should conduct themselves properly. And a member should not, in his capacity as such, seek to influence another person to further the member's private interest. Point 5. A member should not take advantage of or benefit from information that is obtained in its capacity as a member of the Council and which is not generally available to the public. 6. A member should ask for information only about matters of public interest and should not seek information for private or personal interest. 7. A member should ensure that the personal information, for example, qualifications, he provides to the Council, including the Legislative Council Secretariat, is correct and true.
大家好啊，林總議員。
主席，
Mr. Jeffrey Lam, Chairman. When these 7 points were drafted, it was a couple of years ago, and I'm sure at the time the community's expectation on members might have been somewhat different. Well, with regard to the dress code and also the behavior of members, both within and outside this council, the community's expectations might have changed, and therefore, at the first glance, you talk about a member should conduct himself so that he would not be bringing discredit upon this council. How would that? What would that mean? Is very general. It's very vague. Anything under the sun can be included, and if the standards are different, then anything could also not be covered. So maybe, can I invite the legal advisor of the Secretary General to brief us on that? It's not just about the first one. In fact, similar problems or issues arise from the other points. So, the advisory guidelines were first introduced in 1996, and a lot has taken place, and the expectation might have changed. Yes, Secretary General, and then the legal advisor. I'll speak first, and then the Secretary, the legal advisor can supplement. Well, in response to Mr. Lam's question, my understanding is that for this set of guidelines, it was first drafted in the mid-1990s, and it's set out in a paper. Well, back then, the LegCo did consider introducing a binding set of guidelines, but then it was not supported by members back then. That's why this is a set of advisory guideline and is confined to being advisory in nature. As regards the substance of the guidelines, in the past, it's been updated from time to time, but then the principles are rather vague and it's rather general. As regards whether we should treat this as a set of standing documents so that we do not have to bring that up for discussion every time when a new term starts. In fact, in preparing the paper, we've also considered this point. That is, do we really need to bring it up for or raise it for discussion at the start of a new term? Of course, there might be areas that members might wish to update, then you can always raise that at the CMI meeting. Yes, legal advisor? Chairman, back in 1996 when this was first issued, the political system was somewhat different from what we have today, and at the time we did not have the basic law, we did not have Article 79(7). At the time, we only had the registration of interests in this council. But then we then thought about whether we needed to have something else on top of the registration of interests by members. And in the end, the conclusion was that, well, in the process of debating the two motions, we tried to put things down in a more specific manner, and we felt that with regard to the conduct, we should objectively view it, and we should make sure that it will not bring disrepute or discredit upon this council. But then after the two motions were voted down, the motions were about giving powers to the CMI to monitor the performance of or conduct of members or sanctioned members where there was some misconduct. It was decided that the committee could only issue advisory guidelines, but then that was before 1997, and it has been in place ever since then. And up till now, we have already got this misconduct article in the basic law, and if there is two-third majority vote in this council, then the member will have to be disqualified. So that's the legal background to this, and also with the coming into force of the basic law, the importance of the advisory guidelines should be viewed in two perspectives. Number one, we have already got the basic law, and whether we still have this set of guidelines or not, it is debatable. Second, the advisory guidelines would be more specific. Well, you might say that it's very general in nature, but then it's not a shortcoming of the guidelines themselves, because it's hard to put it down in hard and fast terms unless you go back to the UK applying the Nolan's principle. That is, with regard to public officers, they will have to observe certain principles, and they've only managed to come up with 7 principles, and then they try to further elaborate that in a code of conduct for parliamentarians. But then they've also gone through certain process, and they only managed to implement this arrangement after 1997. As regards whether we need to do the same in Hong Kong, as the paper has set out, it involves the CMI, and the CMI has also looked into it, and we have also raised certain possible directions for this committee to decide whether you would like to follow up, and also which direction you'd like to take.
Chairman, If you need me to provide any supplementary information, I will be pleased to do that. However, at this stage, as to what I said just now, I think the clerk has already been prepared so that in the future, if you want to discuss this further, we can always do so. Yes, I know that for this set of guidelines is quite general in nature, and people may have different interpretations of it. For example, what is meant by bringing discredit upon the Legislative Council? Members may interpret this in different ways. Yet I still think this is quite clear. That is, you have to know that your conduct should be restricted by the guidelines. So if members do not want to discuss this paper anymore, then we will issue this set of guidelines to members. And we would also propose to the next term that at the beginning of the legislative term, these guidelines should be issued to members, because for this term we are quite late in doing this. Now, this legislative term has already begun for 2 months, and I think it's kind of late. Actually, it's very difficult for you to detailedly depict each conduct, and if anything happens, we would have to look at that incident independently. So I think this set of guidelines is already adequate, and maybe the next term can look at it again. Assembly Lau, Chairman. Yes, I understand what Mr. Jeffrey Lam says. Well, and I also understand what is meant by bringing discredit upon the Legislative Council, but still this is open to people's interpretation. But if you look at points 4, 5, 6, and 7, they are very clear. That is, for members, no matter whether they are new or old, they cannot influence other people in his capacity as a legislator to further the members' private interest, and he should not take advantage of or benefit from information that is obtained in his capacity as a member of the council and which is not generally available to the public. So this is very clear. Although it sounds obvious, yet all this should be set out clearly. In particular, point 7. A member should ensure that the personal information he provides to the council is correct and true, and this should not be unclear or misleading. So this message is very clear. If a member is discovered that he has done this kind of things, I am sure the consequence would be very grave. So you don't think that it's just an advisory guideline, so it would not bring about any serious consequence. Now, investigation will be conducted, and it may lead to a member being admonished or reprimanded. So I agree that this set of guidelines to be issued. And if we want to amend it, of course, we need to reach a consensus first. We cannot just delete whatever lines we like. And Chairman, last term's members made some suggestions, and I think we should think about them. Actually, there are several rules that are about the sanctions of members. For example, Rule 85 of the Rules of Procedures, that is about the registration of interest and personal pecuniary interest, etc. So there are several types of sanctions, for example, admonishment, reprimanding, and suspension of the member's seat. And also for the basic law, Chairman, you also mentioned that. That is, if 2/3 of the members agree, then this particular member in question can be removed from his seat. And also in paragraph 7, it is mentioned that there are only 2 sanctions, that is disqualification and no sanctions at all. So can we have other types of punishments? Can it be a warning or something like that? Maybe the Secretary General or the legal advisor can look at this. This is about Article 79, bracket 7 of the Basic Law. So other than these sanctions, can the Council come up with other sanctions so that it will not be so extreme as to removing a member from his seat? And also, for the investigation, many members and the public have also mentioned this. That is, it seems it's not too good for legislators to investigate into their fellow legislators' cases. So maybe we should find an independent person or body to do that. I remember the last term also has this inclination, and in particular when it comes to investigation, it would mean a lot of work for these committees. And the clerk mentioned just now, for the House of Commons of the United Kingdom, its former Secretary General talked to us. And yes, we can appoint a commissioner, but we need to have a code of conduct first. So it's like we are going around in circles. So do members agree that we appoint an independent person to be the commissioner, and can we have a code of conduct so that he can rely on that? Yes, we cannot decide on this today, but we can have some discussions. So I put forward some points just now, and actually the last term has already talked about this, so maybe we should consider whether all this should be followed up. Yes, the last term put forward these points, and they said that maybe an independent commissioner should be appointed, and that commissioner should be an independent person. References have also been made to other parliamentaries. And also, we do not have a code of conduct, so what can the commissioner rely on? So all these issues should be recorded, and we would ask the Secretariat to put together papers on this, and then we can discuss them in the future. If members can accept the advisory guidelines, then we will issue the guidelines to members. And of course, if there are changes, we will amend the guidelines, and in the next term, the guidelines should be issued to members as early as possible. The second item is adoption of a procedure for handling complaints by the Committee on Members' Interest in relation to the registration or declaration of members' interest or members' claims for reimbursement of operating expenses. Under Rule 73(1)(c) and (ca) of the Rules of Procedure, two of the functions of CMI are to consider any complaints made in relation to the registration and declaration of members' interests, or members' claims for reimbursement of operating expenses, and applications for advance of operating funds. And if it thinks fit, after consideration, investigate such complaints. Of the CMI of the first LegCo has put together a detailed set of complaints handling procedures concerning the matters I mentioned earlier. And this procedure will be issued to members. And ever since then, the CMI at the beginning of each legislative term would review the procedure and then issue the procedure to members. And again, we are quite late this time. Maybe the Secretary General can brief us on this paper, that is CMI 5/12-13. Yes, Chairman. Well, for this paper, it is about complaints handling procedures. And this does not have to be approved by the House Committee or the Council. This is just the CMI's internal procedures. So after CMI decides on this procedure, then at the beginning of each legislative term, the procedure will be issued to electoral members, and it would also be uploaded onto the electoral website so that legislators and the public would know how the CMI would handle complaints. As for the CMI's terms of reference, the chairman talked about them just now. For this paper, CMI/5/12 to 13, it has set out the issues concerning the procedure. Well, the last term did a review of the procedure because it handled 5 complaints in its term, and several reports were put together. Several complaints were handled in accordance with this procedure. And some parts of the procedure could be improved, and these are set out in paragraphs from paragraphs 4 to 8 of the paper. I'm not going into the details of the last CMI's recommendations. However, if members want to conduct another review, these recommendations would be submitted to members again so that we can have further discussions. So I wonder if members would like to issue this procedure to all the members first, and if there are amendments in the future, we will handle those amendments. So members, with regard to this procedure, do you want to ask any questions? Miss Emily Lau? Well, for paragraph 9 of this paper, it again talked about the appointment of a commissioner. Well, Chairman, for those investigations, they really take a very long time and it's arduous work. Yes, it is not good for legislators to investigate into their fellow legislators, and also it is a very difficult job. So I really think that a commissioner should be appointed. Well, in the former paper, it said that if there is a commissioner, we need a code of conduct. But here, we do not need that because it's about operating expenses and reimbursements, etc. So if a complaint is received in this regard, I think investigations can be conducted even though there is no code of conduct. If members agree, I think we can appoint a commissioner to do this, because after his investigation, a report will be submitted to us. And with a commissioner like that, we can have an independent and objective person to take care of this kind of things. So, Chairman, if there are several significant complaints, then I think we would really have our hands full. The investigations would have to be carried out. The Council would have to let the public know that we would not be defending our fellow legislators. And I would also like to call on the Secretariat, because this is about how you vet the bills or invoices submitted by members. I think you really have to do the vetting very strictly, because members may not want to do that because you ask them all sorts of questions, but actually you are saving them. Otherwise, if any undesirable things happen, then of course they would not want to see that. And actually members should be grateful to you because you're actually helping them by being so strict. And you know all about those formalities, and if you look at the relevant invoices and then you approve them, then that would be okay. So for the Independence Commissioner, if members agree, we can still appoint one, even though we do not have a code of conduct.
Thank you,
Chairman. Actually, when I checked the minutes of meetings during the last term, mention was made about having this commissioner who can help members in investigating into complaints. But then with regard to application for reimbursement of operating expenses and also declaration of interest and also members' conduct and so on, I think in terms of the nature is different. But then all these are very controversial subjects as regards whether we should engage an independent commissioner to do the job. Then of course in terms of reimbursement of operating expenses, if there is a set of guidelines, then of course the commissioner will be able to conduct investigations on that basis. But then it's up to members to decide whether or not we'd like to hire a commissioner to do the job. As for other parliaments, as members are aware, we also did some survey or study during the last term, and we are aware that in different jurisdictions they have a similar mechanism. And as Ms. Emily Lau just said, these papers do share some commonalities. And we can look into them from different perspectives, and also it might involve different aspects of our work. Well, it's a question of whether or not we should engage a commissioner to do the investigation for us. Well, members have to be subject to the monitoring by the public as well as the media, and I'm sure members are fully aware of how they should conduct themselves. And under the present mechanism, as far as I understand it, as Ms. Emily Lau just said, actually a lot of advice has been given by the Secretariat to members as to how they should register such interests or declare such interests. But if something happens, how we're going to investigate into such complaints, well, we have already got some established procedures, and I'm sure Ms. Lau is very familiar with those procedures. But then on that basis, are we going to go even further by engaging an independent commission? Because sometimes the complaints might be anonymous, others are not anonymous, and some might have been exposed by the media. So we do have an established mechanism in dealing with such complaints. When it comes to whether we should have a commissioner carrying out the investigation, to a certain extent, our Secretariat has been doing this. But then whether we have a dedicated person doing the job, well, we haven't decided. So I'm not ready to say yes or no to this proposal. We'll have to look at the operation of the Secretariat. I'm sure the Secretary General will also have to look at the implications as far as the Secretariat is concerned. Instead of hiring a dedicated commissioner to do it, I think the Secretariat is doing very much the job. And if he's just engaged to carry out investigation, I think there is also this question of workload for the commissioner. And therefore, these are things that we will have to consider very carefully. And we will have to do it in an effective and efficient manner. With regard to the case of Cam 9 White that happened last time, during the last term, it was a rather special case. And so we set up a select committee to look into it. It should not have been called a subcommittee. But so it's not really a select committee, but then we set up a subcommittee under the CMI to do it, and we follow very much the procedures applicable to the select committee under the House, and therefore this is something that we need to further consider. Yes, Ms. Emily Lau. Chairman, I agree with what you said. We will have to weigh the pros and cons. We are not suggesting that we should make a decision today. In particular, when there are so many newcomers, we have to ask them to consider it. But then when there is a complaint arising, then sometimes we might be caught by surprise. But then you will have to have some procedures to deal with that. And if we are involved in the investigation, and there are also other members who might be embroiled in the controversy in the first place, and you've asked the Secretary General to do it. All right, let's assume that if the SG can appoint somebody within his secretariat to do it, so this will be done administratively. Well, it will be independent professional in conducting the investigation, and if we all find it acceptable, then of course it's okay. All right, Chairman, you're thinking about saving money, but then is it appropriate when it's done? I don't think that's done elsewhere in other parliaments. So can the Secretariat provide us with some information? Well, from my perspective, I think, number one, we should not be investigating ourselves. We should not be investigating our peers, because we have been criticizing the government for that, and therefore we should set a good example by not doing that. And indeed, members' workload is already very heavy, and if we are not going to investigate ourselves or our peers, then we should appoint a framework which is very independent, so that they would do the investigation, and then of course the report will have to come back to this council, and if we do not accept the findings, then of course we will have to state the reasons. So we do respect this independent establishment, or else if there are a few complaints coming in, then we'll be overloaded and overwhelmed. So we will have to resort to our wisdom in dealing with that. I think you've also raised another point. That is, if it's outside the Secretariat, then it's a separate matter altogether. So we're talking about an independent commissioner. But then this is going to be a major change. Well, he will be appointed by us. Are we going to appoint just one individual or what? So how is he going to conduct the investigation? Because he cannot just do it on his own. He will need to have a team of officers providing support to him. So, SG, can you provide us with a paper? All right, I'm just thinking aloud. Because whenever we have select committee, the Secretariat will have to deploy a whole team to work on it. It's very resource intensive. Yes, Mr. Dennis Kwok, I think the issue raised by Ms. Emily Lau is very important, and the independence and impartiality of the Secretariat would be very important, but then for the Secretariat to investigate into it, that will be quite a drag on their resources, and actually you're putting them on the spot, because you are asking them to investigate into such sensitive issues, and they will also have to maintain this working relationship with members. And also in the UK, they've also got the Office of the Independent Commissioner. So that's the practice in the UK. They have the Office of the Commissioner. So this is an investigation. This is an independent commissioner who has been tasked to do the job. But then in their case, they have 600 plus members, and therefore the workload would be rather heavy. But then in Hong Kong, how are we going to do it? I think that's something that we need to look into it. All right. Any response? Legal advisor? Thank you. Yes, thank you for clarifying the role of the SG. I think the Secretariat is here to support members, and that's in line with what the Electoral Commission's task of providing secretarial support to this council. And on top of that, the Secretariat is also the controlling officer of the expenditure head, and therefore we do shoulder some legal responsibilities under the law, and therefore for Secretariat staff to assist members to comply with the relevant guidelines, and also where necessary they would also be doing some checking or verification work, but then they would not be conducting any investigation into any complaints. That's the duties of the Secretariat so far. When it comes to investigation, it will be very complicated. So let's just think about it. It's no longer about the individuals. It's about the whole process and everything. So we will have to be very careful in dealing with complaints against members, how those are being dealt with. So we will just base our work on the paper that is prepared. We are basically there to clarify the facts And then amongst members, there will be a discussion as to what needs to be done. In fact, for any conclusion that we may have, we will have to go back to the House for a decision. So we will have to think about the system. We will have to think it through. As somebody just said, if you were to appoint a commissioner to conduct the investigation, will he be able to do it on his own without any support? Yes, thank you, Chairman. According to my understanding of the suggestion by Ms. Lau, actually, one of the purposes is to reduce the burden on this committee. So it's about our complaints under 731C. If that is the case, we do not have to achieve it overnight. Instead of having a dedicated commissioner, we can have somebody who is independent, and then he can help the CMI in conducting some investigations, and that would just fall within the scope of 731C, instead of having to come up with a new set of guidelines or code. So he is here to assist the CMI, and he doesn't have to be a standing arrangement. So it can be done on an ad hoc basis. Whenever there is a complaint, we can appoint an individual to do it. So that could also be considered. So under the existing mechanism, this could very much become a pilot scheme. We can try it out. All right? Mention was made about a commissioner. I think the Secretariat can also prepare a paper. I think that would also facilitate our discussion. We can also consider the suggestion by the legal advisor just now. So instead of having an independent commissioner, we can do it, he can be somebody who can command authority. So how to do it, how to go about it, what we can consider it. Well, I agree. Well, for the first one, it's very complicated. We will have to come up with a code of conduct. But then, of course, we can ask the Secretary or SG to provide us with some basic information. But then on the second, on the latter suggestion, as the legal advisor suggested, he can be more focused, and there is no need for us to hire somebody on a permanent basis. So if we have the set of rules or guidelines available, then whenever something untoward happens, then we can always engage an individual to do the job, and that will be done on an ad hoc basis. For example, if there is a case which requires investigation, then of course we can hire or engage this individual to do the job for us. So you don't have to hire somebody who will be here on a permanent basis, but then you will have all the framework in place. You can also have the categories of people and also the candidates available, and then where there is a complaint, we can go out and engage that person. Because, Chairman, you were very concerned. We cannot just rely on one person doing the job. Well, we will need to have a team of people, and if it has to be independent, then does it mean that the Secretariat will have to provide secretarial support to that guy for conducting the investigation and so on? So, legal advisor, what is your initial view on this? Can you share with us? Well, with regard to certain declaration and so on, very often, comparatively speaking, they are relatively simple matters. So it's just about collection of data, verification of certain information, and so on. And if we can have somebody who is a professional accountant, then he should be able to do the job. As for any substantial work or substantive work, then it depends on what members think. If you think that this is something that we can pursue, then we can also consider, well, we can look at our past experience and then we'll decide what manpower we will be needing. If it's just about general investigation, for example, omission of declaration or registration, I don't think that would be very labor intensive.
Yes, let's follow that direction. If Members have no other comments concerning this paper. Then do members agree that this procedure be issued to members? As for the procedure, you can see it in the appendix. Now, as divided into different parts, convening the first meeting, preliminary consideration, followed by investigation, suspension of work on the complaints, the committee's decision as to whether a complaint is substantiated, confidentiality requirements, etc. So for this set of procedures, we will issue it to members. Do you agree? Yes, I agree. However, for paragraphs 5 and 8 of the paper, you can see that the CMI of the last term has asked us to consider making several changes. For example, the chairman will decide whether a meeting should be held to consider a complaint, and he's only given 2 working days. It is suggested that it should be extended to 3 working days. So maybe we should discuss this in the future. Otherwise, if we need to initiate an investigation, we will have to revisit all these issues again. So there are some questions set out under paragraph 5, that is about the days allowed. So what do you think? Well, for the previous term, actually a number of complaints were received. And legislators were very busy. In particular, in the last 2 years, they had their hands full. So when it comes to the notification period, and 2 working days were given to the chairman to make decision, etc., the last term did encounter difficulties. So the CMI thought that maybe the time limits can be relaxed a bit. Well, for the last term, the CMI used the procedure several times and it was feasible. And as the chairman said just now, in future meetings we can revisit these issues and make improvements. However, at this stage, of course, we do not know when a complaint will be lodged. So maybe we should adopt these procedure first. So when it comes to improving the details, because this will not affect the fairness and justice, so maybe we don't have to do it now. As for the appendix, I think some minor improvements have already been made. For example, changing from 2 working days to 3 working days, has that been changed? We are still using the 2 working days. Nothing has been changed yet. Now, if members do not agree that a meeting be held, then in 3 working days they have to notify the clerk. So you're talking about paragraphs 5 and 8? Well, for paragraphs 5 and 8, what I mean is that maybe members can discuss them in greater details at future meetings, because members would need time to discuss all these. And from now to the next meeting, there is a vacuum period. So in the interim, maybe this procedure can be adopted and issued to members, because for these recommendations, they have nothing to do with fairness and confidentiality. They are just operational issues. Well, the clerk is right. That's a vacuum period, and this vacuum period can be very long. Do you think we can handle all these at the next meeting? I think we should start right away. Otherwise, if there are complaints and these have not been amended, then you will have a lot of work to do. Well, I think the clerk's thinking is like this, and actually I accept that. I think members would need time to discuss all these. So I think the first thing we need to do is to issue this procedure to members so that members know that there is such a procedure? Well, Chairman, I would like to add a word. Well, it's said that you are the party whip of your party, so please explain to your members what's happening, and I hope there is a consensus so that we can further our discussions. I don't think members have the time to focus on this yet. However, if there are complaints and still we are looking at all these details, then maybe it's too late. So I think we better have an improved system. Well, I'm the chairman of this committee and I have the responsibility to talk to all the members, not just my party members. Well, you can consult all the 70 members then. Okay, I will act as soon as possible. So if members agree, then this procedure will be issued to all electoral members. And also it will be uploaded onto the electoral website so that all members and the public would have access to it. And as for changes, we will be discussing them at the next meeting. And if there are amendments, they will be handled at the next meeting. Okay, let us look at the next paper. That's about members' interests. Issuance of an information paper on the relevant provisions, requirements for disclosure of pecuniary interest by members in voting or withdrawal in case of direct pecuniary interest. As members all know, this is in line with Rule 83A of the ROP. As for Rule 84, it states that if a member, a member shall not vote upon any question in which he has a direct pecuniary interest. The Secretariat has explained all these to members of the last term. And in this paper, we have given members the relevant details. The paper number is CMI/6/12 to 13. So members would know that they need to declare their interest. So maybe the Secretary General can take us through the paper, or the clerk can take us through the paper. Well, for this paper, it's different from the other papers we saw just now, because for this paper, it was not issued to members of the last term. For the last term, we have set up a select committee for the Lehman Brothers issue, another committee on the construction of the express rail link, etc. So people were very concerned about members' interests at that time. And we issued a notice to members for this purpose in the last term. And also there was a complaint. And that's about Rule 83A. There was a complaint alleging that a member violated that rule. So we conducted a detailed investigation and a report was put together. The CMI had in-depth discussions of Rule 83A. Now for Rule 83A, it is about direct or indirect pecuniary interest. That is, if a member have direct or indirect pecuniary interest in a certain matter, before he makes a speech at a LegCo, he has to disclose it orally. So this has nothing to do with the registration of his interest. He has to make an oral declaration of the interest at the meeting. Members have also asked this question. That is, what is meant by direct or indirect pecuniary interest? And in paragraph 3, it says that, well, the member himself has to judge whether they have a direct or indirect pecuniary interest. For direct pecuniary interest, if a member has that kind of interest, he cannot take part in the relevant voting. So with regard to Rule 83A and Rule 84 of the ROP, the last CMI had a number of views, and the views are set out here. So if members agree, the paper will be issued to members so that members would have a clear understanding of these two rules. So the previous CMI had looked at all these, and there were several rounds of discussions. Last year, we completed a scrutiny of the company's bill. It seems that for a lot of provisions, members were not too clear about them because they also involve declaration and conflict of interest. So for any rule, it has to reflect the relevant requirements in law. We cannot just ask members to make their own judgment. In particular, I mentioned just now that when we have new laws and when there are amendments to laws, we must adhere to them. This is very important. Chairman, I don't know what Mr. Lam is suggesting. Well, I made it very clear just now. If you paid attention, you would know it. That is, now we have the company's ordinance. Well, in the past, there may be ambiguities, and now we have made such ambiguous areas clearer. So, if we need to make a declaration of interest, we need to follow the relevant Hong Kong laws. Now, in this paper, it wants us to decide whether these requirements should be issued to our members. And the requirements are set out in the appendix. So for the contents of the appendix, can member take a look at that? Of course, the whole copy will be given to members. Is there a particular part that you want to discuss about? I would like to know members' views, because these will be issued to members of the Legislative Council. Mr. Jeffrey Lam? Well, for each case and each incident, it would involve different things. As I mentioned, the company's ordinance just now is this thick. We scrutinized it. We have scrutinized it for 4 years, and the legal advisor knows very well about that. If you want to refer to the relevant provision today when we discuss this item, I think it's quite impossible. What I'm saying is just that we cannot pretend to be omniscient. We always need to refer to the relevant provision, and these provisions are very clear. If there's any mistake, maybe we do not have to bear the legal responsibility, but we will become a laughingstock. Yes, I understand Mr. Lam's concern. Maybe Mr. Lam can rest assured. That is, the company's ordinance has not commenced yet, and many parts of it have been rewritten, and many of the requirements are about companies. So for our direct pecuniary interest here is about individual members, and it's also about their work in the council. Yes, under some certain circumstances, there may be a relation, but many of these are not directly related to that piece of legislation.
All right, the new law might not have come into operation, but then for the old set, many people knew about them, and they are very familiar with the requirements, and therefore we do need to know what is stated in the law. It cannot be ambiguous. With regard to conflict of interest, it can be quite a major issue, and if you just rush into any judgment, that would also discredit the committee. Thank you. Let's be more specific. As you can see from para 10, well, let's take a look at para 2 to 8, and of course we also have the appendix, and so why don't we look at them one by one. All right, para 2, 3, 4, 5 is about the disclosure of pecuniary interest by members. And para 2 refers to Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure, which provides that in the Council or in any committee or subcommittee, a member shall not move any motion or amendment relating to a matter in which he has a pecuniary interest, whether direct or indirect, or speak on any such matter, except where he discloses the nature of that interest. The main purpose of such disclosure is to ensure that other members and the public are made aware when a member is participating in the proceedings of the Council or its committees of any pecuniary interest which might reasonably be thought to be relevant to those proceedings.
利益。冇問題啊。
No question? Next, direct or indirect pecuniary interest. The ROP does not provide specifically the circumstances under which a member does or does not have a pecuniary interest in a matter that is before the Council or a committee, be it direct or indirect. It is for individual members to judge whether they have a direct or indirect pecuniary interest in a matter under consideration at the relevant meeting of the Council or committees. The basic principle, as having been adopted by the CMI of the previous LegCo in determining whether a pecuniary interest should be disclosed, is whether the interest might reasonably be thought by others to influence the member's actions or speech in the matter being considered. It has been the view of the CMI that for a pecuniary interest to be direct, it should be immediate and not merely of a remote or general character. As regards indirect pecuniary interest, it is an interest not immediate and personal to a member, but does have a certain relationship with the member, which would make a reasonable person to consider that such interest might have certain influence on the action or speech of the member. Okay? Para 4. The requirement for disclosure of pecuniary interest by members under Rule 83A is distinct from the requirement for registration of interest by members under Rule 83, as provided in Para 3.3 of the Guidelines on Registration of Interest issued to all members. The registering of interest is additional to and in no way a replacement of the requirement on members to disclose pecuniary interest under Rule 83A. Hence, an interest register still requires to be disclosed if it falls within Rule 83A. So you can't just say that after you have registered the interest, you do not have to disclose it. So under this, you will have to disclose it anyway. And under Rule 83A of the ROP, disclosure by a member of the nature of his direct or indirect pecuniary interest in a matter in the Council, a committee or subcommittee is a condition to the member speaking on the matter. Based on the principle that it is a member's responsibility to disclose his pecuniary interest in a matter being considered to enable other people to judge if his views on a matter have been influenced by his interest, it has been the view of the CMI of the previous term that a member should disclose his pecuniary interest at the beginning of his speech on the matter. So we are referring to pecuniary interest, whether direct or indirect. All right, is that clear? Legal advisor. Thank you, Chairman. I don't know if members have any questions on this, because recently I've noticed that, in fact, in the past, we have had such incidents that is, members at certain meetings might disclose certain things, but then the way they disclose it would be that, they would say that on the register, they've already registered certain interests, but then with regard to the specific circumstances, he's not sure whether the company that he belonged to might have pecuniary interest, and they just declare anyway. So in doing so, that might not be fully in line with the requirement under Rule 83A, because as is repeatedly set out here, you will have to disclose the nature of such conflict. So you don't have to give the specific details, but then you will have to disclose the nature of this. You might say that, there is a possibility that there might be a pecuniary interest because the company or the group that I belong to might have some business dealings or considerations in relation to the subject under discussion. My company might have taken part in the tendering exercise and so on. But then I'm not sure if this is fully in line with Rule 83A. Indeed, during the last term, on different occasions, this has been raised for discussion. But then the format would be somewhat different. For example, on a particular subject, let's say on the railway development project, the subcommittee might have a series of meetings. It's like the WKCDA subcommittee, but there would also be a series of discussions. So does that mean that every time before speaking, a member will have to make such a disclosure? That has also given rise to some members in the past term expressing concerns, and they also thought that there was a need for some improvements. So there are two things here. Number one, at the time of disclosure, you will have to disclose the nature of such interest. And number two, with regard to the timing of such disclosure, it will have to be done before you speak. But then in the paper, we have not set out that if the same subject matter is being dealt with at different meetings, you will have to do so at every meeting, or whether you only need to do it once and for all. It might also involve the company ordinance, and under the company ordinance, it's very clear. So the person in charge will have to declare the interest, and if he's not aware of that, he will not be held accountable. So that's very clear under the company's ordinance. And also, and the company where you work for and where you have certain responsibilities, because I've also made similar declarations, and I've also said that I'm not sure if the company might take part in the tendering exercise and so on, because indeed, if you're not aware of that, you are not aware of it. But then for the person in question, if he has a relationship with that company, well, do you know it? If he says that he doesn't know, then you must trust him. But then there might be occasions whereby, let's say, if it's a construction company, it might put in a bid, but then for the person not in charge of that project, he might not be aware of it. And therefore, under the company's ordinance, it provides that if you're not the person in charge, and if you are not in the know, then you do not have to be held liable. And of course, whether you need to prove it, then is at another level. You will have to do it at another level. All right, legal advisor, what's your view? Because this is what happens most frequently. All right, you might be a non-executive director of a company, but then the company in question might not have to operate via that member. And if he's not aware of that, there is no way that he can declare the interest. So if that's the case, then would that be in breach of this, which might trigger an investigation? Would that be the case? Chairman, concerning the rules of procedure in disclosing a direct or indirect pecuniary interest, the principles to go by are that, as is set out in a paper, the most important guiding principle is to allow the public who are watching the performance of the members to know if there is any conflict of interest. Of course, I understand that with regard to the director's personal knowledge of what is happening is important under the law, and it's also not an easy question to answer. During the last term, when this committee investigates into a complaint with regard to non-executive directors' role in a particular company, because there might be subsidiaries under that company, and they might have been involved in some commercial behavior, and in how that member should have discharged his duty under this set of rules. Well, there were also considerations because we looked at the several complaints, and those form the basis for such considerations. I don't think I need to repeat those cases because those have been set out in the relevant reports. But then what is relevant is that the CMI then, and the chairman actually moved the motion on it. So that's chapter 3 of the report, and that chapter sets out the procedures that would be applicable, and during the motion, different members also expressed their views, and I think the views that have been expressed just now were also expressed during the motion debate. But then during the last term, for the purpose of investigating into that complaint, members also came up with some guiding principles. But then would those principles still apply in this term? I think I'll leave it to this committee, because if it happens that there is another complaint of the same nature, and if the facts are very similar, then how should that be dealt with? So I can only leave that to members to decide, because this is a very complicated issue. But once we have prepared this appendix for members to declare their interest, will it be able to resolve the problem raised by Mr. Lam when this member is not aware of it? And as a result, he might have failed to declare interest. Then would we be breaching 83A? We also have to know it. Or else after this is issued, then if I don't know what I'm supposed to do, then it's going to be a problem. So this is something that we will have to deal with, because we do have some concrete examples. So how should we interpret that?
Mr. Jeffrey, just now I talked a lot about the company's ordinance. So we cannot just rely on the views of this committee and say we are right, because we have the law. And the law says that if you really are not in the law, then you should not be held responsible. And it's that thick, that's ordinance. So it's not just about the company's ordinance. There are also many other ordinances that are involved. So when we have a case in front of us, we have to be objective. And we have to look at the actual situation. At the same time, we also have to refer to the Hong Kong laws, because we are the legislature. And if we make a mistake, we will definitely be a laughingstock. Yes, I totally agree. If we want to make a judgment now basing on hypothetical scenarios, it's impossible. And for paragraph 3, it sets out certain principles. So ever since the establishment of this committee, these principles have been in place. The problem is, whenever the committee considers a complaint and try to find out whether investigation should be conducted, these principles would have to be followed. So as for the exact scenario, we really cannot be too general. In the past, I have been giving advices to members. The member in question will be the person who knows the best, and making judgment is the responsibility of the CMI. And we have learned from our past experiences. A number of investigations have been conducted by the last CMI, and there was an investigation on independent non-executive director. So as for this paper, whether we can use it, yes, I think we can use it. But you may want to add some things to it. We want to say that members have their responsibilities. They have to make their judgment first. But when there's a complaint, of course, we have to look at that complaint individually. This paper has not included scenarios such as independent non-executive directors, because for different companies, the independent non-executive directors may perform different functions. And also for criminal liability provisions, they are only applicable in scenarios concerning principal officers, for example, the management and directors, etc. But for other provisions, they would be about absolute responsibility. That is, no matter whether you know it or not, you have to be held responsible, and that would cover fines. Well, Chairman, we have to decide as to whether we should issue this paper. This is very basic. If you do not issue it, I think it will become a big news. So you really have to be very careful. Otherwise, you will have to explain to the public. But if members want to discuss certain issues, of course, I'm willing to do that. And if they want the Secretariat to assist them, and I think the Secretariat can do that. And Mr. Lam keeps on talking about the company's ordinance and liability. Well, the legal advisor has said that we are not talking about all those. We are talking about direct pecuniary interest. So if we can write the paper clearer, and if we can mention the previous debates, etc., then that may be helpful. I think that was quite controversial, and it was not passed, right? That's why some members are pretty aggrieved. So I think, Chairman, you should use your wisdom so that we can have a systematic discussions, and all members would know what requirements they have to abide by. So, Chairman, you should understand. I think maybe you also cast a vote against it that time. So I hope a simpler paper can be put together so that we can have further discussions. So I don't think anybody is objecting to the issue of this paper. Members are just saying that there are further points to be considered. This paper would have to be issued. Otherwise, members would have nothing to follow. So maybe you can talk to the Secretary General and the legal advisor so that another paper can be put together for us to discuss. Maybe Mr. Lam can also look at the company's ordinance again and see what's related to us, because it doesn't want us to become the laughing stock. So, Chairman, I think we really have to be very careful. Chairman, I think this issue is directly related to me. Although I have made all sorts of declarations, and some senior members have also reminded me that I should make declaration, but I am working for a big company that covers a lot of areas, so I really would like to know what I should do in the future. Now, first of all, this paper would have to be issued, and I think next time, whenever I want to speak, I have to declare my interest beforehand. Otherwise, I think things have to be made clear. Otherwise, I may have to do this at every meeting. Now, the legal advisor just now mentioned independent non-executive director. I'm a non-executive director, but I'm not independent. I am paid. So this is quite troublesome. I hope these points can really be clarified. Mr. Lam? Well, Ms. Lau said that we are trying to give people a difficult time. No, I'm not doing that. I'm not saying that we should not issue this paper. I'm just saying that we should be very careful. And I'm not referring to any case. Well, the company's ordinance has existed for a long time. We just amended it this time. People just didn't read it. So while we are talking about directors and senior management, well, when it comes to the responsibilities, I'm just saying that if we receive a case like that, we have to be very careful. I'm always saying that if a new case is referred to the CMI, we have to be very careful. We cannot take things for granted. I'm not referring to any particular case. Just now, the legal advisor also talked about people's declaration of interest. I have expressed my views in that regard. Well, some people would say that they may have a conflict of interest, and I would wonder how come they do not know whether the interest is related to that particular topic. So in the future, if a case is referred to CMI, I am proposing that there are some things we should do. I think this paper should be issued as soon as possible, but in the future, when we handle cases, we have to be very careful. Yes, I understand members' views. Yes, there are requirements already. Now we are issuing this paper from paragraphs 2 to 5. It serves to provide information to members. So it's not about minute details. Here we are talking about direct or indirect pecuniary interest only. And of course, members would have to exercise their own judgment. So members can take this into consideration, and Mr. Lam is right. We will have to be careful. We will also have to look at the company's ordinance and we need to strike a balance. So this is for members' information. They should read this and make a judgment as to what kind of interest they should declare. I don't think a member should declare his interest every time he speaks, but if there is really direct or indirect pecuniary interest, of course he should declare that. Well, Chairman, I believe members do have the responsibility to clarify things. And it's not you are just sitting there and suddenly you get this paper. You should have read the paper before coming to the meeting. And when you read the paper, you would wonder if you have pecuniary interest involved. And if that is the case, you should really look into it. I remember we had that Express Rail Link meeting. And members were told that they had the responsibility to check the pecuniary interest. And the legal advisor was sitting outside the room, and he was trying to help members. If members have any doubts, they could always go out to consult him. So you can always consult the legal advisor or the Secretary General. Well, nobody would know your interest. Only you yourself would know your interest. So at the end of the day, you are the one who has to make the judgments. So if you do not make that judgments, then there may be complaints, and there will be a lot of work for us. We don't want to do that. Well, some members are unfortunate because their companies may involve a lot of interest. They may do business in a lot of areas. So I think you have to be particularly careful. I don't really want to handle all these complaints cases. So this paper is to help members so that they can fulfill the requirements. So at each meeting, you have to make declarations. So you can't say that if there are 40 meetings, then you just declare your interest at the first meeting, and for the next 39 meetings, you do not have to declare your interest. But for Mr. Ye, what should he do? Because his company's business covers a lot of areas. So I always say that you should keep a list of the businesses in your pocket. If he omits something, I'm sure he will regret it. And he will be very thankful if you tell him in advance what kind of interest he should declare. Our members should know that the requirements are very strict because we have to face society. Now, if you really omitted a certain interest, you are only inviting complaints, so you really have to be careful. So this are already in the rules of procedures. That is about pecuniary interest. So this is just a reminder. So members, you all agree that we issue this paper, right? Next is not voting or withdrawal in case of direct pecuniary interest. I'm not going to read it out. This is a clear reminder. That is, if you have direct pecuniary interest, you should not vote, or you should withdraw from that discussion. Para 8. Sanctions relating to interests.
Under Rule 85, any member who fails to comply with Rule 83A or disclosure of pecuniary interest, or Rule 84(1) or 1A on voting or withdrawal in case of direct pecuniary interest may be admonished, reprimanded, or suspended by the Council on a motion to that effect. So this serves as a reminder. All right. If members do not have any specific comments, then we will be forwarding Para 2 to 8 to members, so that in the course of deliberating on our business, members should be aware of the relevant requirements. Okay. If there are no further questions, then we'll move on to the next item. Items for discussion at the next meeting. When will the next meeting be held? He wants to have a meeting every day. So when will that be, Chairman? Well, when necessary, we can convene our meetings, but then the practice is to have one meeting every 2 months. So we do not have frequent meetings like our panels. But then please don't think that we're not going to have another meeting. We may have to convene a meeting very shortly, because as soon as there is a complaint, we will have to convene meetings right away. So please do not think that the next meeting will only be held a long time after now. So roughly about 2 months later, and we'll be consulting you. All right. So please do not take up the slot at 4:30 every Thursday, because we're going to have a caucus meeting. That's why, Chairman, you'll have to come up with a mechanism. I think that will benefit everybody. Okay, if I can refer members to paper 7/12 to 13, is about is a list of issues suggested to be considered. So do members wish to add anything to the list? Because these have been issues that have been raised during the last term. Number 1, review of requirements for members' registration of interest. Number 2, proposal of appointing an independent commissioner to handle complaints against members. That was, we discussed that just now. And 3rd, review of the procedure of CMI for handling complaints. So the Secretariat will prepare some papers, in particular the issue on the commissioner. All right. We will come up with the specific arrangements for these issues to be discussed. So we will have to ask the Secretariat for the preparation of a detailed paper for us. All right. So much for today's meeting. Meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.